Our first speaker tonight is Matt Stratton. He is a DevOps Days core organizer. He is my podcast co-host, and he is a good friend. And he most recently took a really awesome new job at PagerDuty, which I gotta say, I have a lot more affection for PagerDuty now that I'm not on call and they don't wake me up in the night. But on the other hand, it's much, much worse when you don't wake up, that horrible sinking feeling. So I think we're gonna hear about incidents and accidents and how we manage all of this stuff. So give it up for Matt Stratton.
There we go. Yes? Yes? Yes. Yes. Okay.
Quick point of order, there are a couple of chairs right here. If you're standing in the back, there are chairs.
Oh. Well, that's okay because I wanted to switch for this. So this is by design.
Oh, sorry, I thought they pulled this up.
Well, I could. It's just there's only so much room. There's only room for one laptop at a time. So that's okay. I can talk.
Okay. No. You don't need to talk. You gotta be kidding me. I'll just keep talking.
There you go. Hey,
and we have speaking of CFPs. Ooh, very important.
Today?
What just happened today? Seats right up here. Thank you very much.
The CFP for DevOps Days Chicago just opened up today.
Aside
so if
from
you
being
aren't accepted at Bridget's thing, you could come and we could be your silver medal.
I don't know about that. DevOps Days Chicago is pretty awesome, and I got to speak at it, and then I got to not speak at it because they keep having it while we're canoeing in the Boundary Waters.
You were technically the very first person to speak at DevOps Days Chicago.
Right? There is that. There is that. Being a Packers fan or being a what do you even have? The Bears.
Yeah.
The Bears. I'm not a Bears fan. It's true, but on the other hand, the Bears are something that makes Stratton happy. So
Sort of.
Sometimes.
The Hawks and the Cubs. But, yes, that's pretty true.
But aside from hearing about PagerDuty stuff, yes, DevOps Days Chicago, their CFP is open now. It closes.
Early bird tickets.
It
closes June 1st.
So you have some time to think about it.
Yes.
But without further ado, once again, let's welcome Matt Stratton.
Thank you. Awesome. Can someone keep track of time for me? Okay, that'd be great. So, this thing. Okay, so I used to, at the beginning, talk about who I was and what I did, and this would be my slide that said, hey, I'm the co-host of Arrested DevOps, and I run DevOps Days Chicago, and I work at PagerDuty now, and it have a picture of my license plate that says DevOps. But about 3 weeks ago, Corey Quinn gave a talk at DevOps Days Charlotte called Don't You Know Who I Am? That was about arrogant speakers in tech, and said nobody needs to give their resume at the beginning, so instead I just decided to put pictures of my kids to get you on my side. So, yeah. Okay, so who here has been on one of those phone calls when something's going terribly, terribly wrong, you're trying to troubleshoot a problem with your fellow human beings, and it's just the biggest challenge in the world? How many people have had that experience? How many people really enjoyed that and want to do it all the time? Right? Okay, liars. So incident calls can be really tough. They can be very stressful, but they don't have to be as stressful as they usually are. There's a lot of things that we can learn from disciplines that do this well, such as first responders, and we can take some of those learnings, we can apply them to how we manage incidents within IT, kind of the work that we do. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So a couple disclaimers. Disclaimer part the first. We're going to learn from these other industries, but we're not going to take on their stresses. So if we think about air traffic controllers, we're going to make references to how people do stuff in air traffic control, how first responders work, maybe how things happen within a hospital. Those are literal life or death situations. The vast majority of us working in IT do not have to deal with that, okay? So don't take on that pressure, that feeling, just because we're following some of those principles. And it can be tricky because we sometimes will use language that sounds like that. And this is something I'm on a little bit of a mission on right now, is there's a lot of paramilitary talk within incident response. And I don't remember exactly who said it. I would say I was having a conversation with Bridget and a coworker at the same time in 2 different Slacks, so I don't remember who they were quoting when they told me, but either Bridget or my coworker told me that someone said, basically, all these people in IT who use paramilitary language would shit their dockers if they actually saw combat. So we're going to use some of these words, but understand that we want to be careful that we only take on the parts of it that are valuable for the things that we do. Now, that being said, there are certain types of IT where, yes, you do deal in life or death situations. If you're running IT for a nuclear reactor, certain types of hospital work. Hey, someone's got to keep those computers and air traffic control working, okay? That's the exception, not the rule. And if you're doing that, then God bless. Disclaimer the second. This is a really large topic, okay? It might seem as simple as, well, let's just get on a bridge and we'll talk and we'll solve the problem and everything until the site gets back up. But incident response is a very complex situation. It's a very complex topic. And it has a lot of details. For example, you can think about things like having to quantify the business impact. What are your business continuity rules? All the way through organizational factors. What team owns what? And even getting as precise as human psychology about how people react to stress and react to complex situations. This is only about a 40-minute talk, okay? So we're going very, very high level. And this actually came up the last time I gave this talk, last week, I think. I got a little, how many people have given talks before? Okay, so how many people have experienced this, where you say, hey, are there any questions? And someone stands up and they do something, and then your only response to their question is, that wasn't a question. That was you wanted to stand up and sound smart. So I had that experience where someone's like, well, how do you figure about tracking defects? And blah, blah, blah. And I was like, this is a 30-minute talk, man. We're just doing a little bit. So keep in mind, this is not everything. What I'm trying to do here is give you a flavor for some mechanisms towards incident response, and especially around the idea of an incident commander and how this might work. And if you'd like to know more, the Library of Congress recommends response.pagerduty.com. What that is not our product, okay? So fundamentally, I'm not going to refer to the product of PagerDuty at all here. None of this is about how to use PagerDuty to solve your problems. Don't tell the Midwest rep that I said that. What a lot of this is about, though, is what we've done at PagerDuty is we've open sourced our incident response practices, and those are actually available at response.pagerduty.com. And then there's a GitHub repo. We take pull requests, all that good stuff. So I'm going to kind of give you a taste for that. If you want to learn more about how that works, you can go check that out. Another thing that's not even part of my talk, but just happened today, is this guy Rich, who's the guy who actually worked on this originally, he today open sourced our security training, which I thought was very cool. And I was like, well, that's kind of rad. It's also the best security training I've ever experienced in terms of humorousness and enjoyability. So you might want to check that out. Maybe you do it better there. So anyway, this is a short talk. So we're going to break this up into 3 sections. Things that you should do before you ever even get on an incident call. Things that you should do during an incident. And then the things that you should do afterwards. And they are all equally important. We tend to only think that the during is the thing that really matters. It's actually probably the least important, because you already sort of know how to do that, right? We know how to talk to each other. We know how to solve problems. We're going to talk about how to do it a little bit better, though. So before, in the beginning, the most important thing to do is have criteria about what causes or what generates an incident. And these things should all be driven by business-related criteria. Something like, hey, order volume is 20% lower than it is usually during this time of day. Things that do not generate an incident directly. Something that an incident is not. Nagio says that we're using 90% of the CPU. Who cares? Okay? As long as the service is doing what it's supposed to do. Now, these things can be indicators. They can help us understand. But this is the thing. I'm a cranky old sysadmin. I've been doing this for a couple decades. And that's what we used to do, right? Who cares about the business? Who cares about the service? It was like, these are my boxes. And damn it, you're not going to, we're going to make sure that the memory is good. Oh, we're running out of disk, then I'm going to go delete some developers' files because, I'm going to keep that server where it's supposed to be. So keep this in mind. Now, those things can be indicators, but they are not actually the criteria for determining, is this an incident? So this might sound silly, but if you're not sure whether something's an incident, you don't know whether to respond to it. This is PagerDuty's definition of an incident. Yours might be different. That's okay. This just make sure you have a definition somewhere and keep it relatively simple, because you need to be able to always remember what it is. So for us, we say it's any unplanned disruption or degradation of service that is actively affecting customers' ability to use the product. That's an incident. That's a problem. Hey, a typo in code might cause that, right? A full outage could also be an incident. These are different scenarios, so we would have more granularity, right? That's where we talk about different severities. Post that incident criteria widely. Make sure it's clear. What you don't want to do is be litigating this during a call. The reason we do this before is during a call, that is the time to solve the problem. It's not the time to argue about how important the problem is, right? Because during that incident, it can be difficult to make complex business impact decisions. Usually these things are happening in the middle of the night. Maybe not usually, but it seems like they're always happening in the middle of the night. They're certainly not happening at a good time, because there's no good time to take an outage. And we're all super stressed out. So nobody wants to argue about whether this is important or not, especially because the business owner probably thinks it's very important. You just want to get off the call. So you're going to say it's not that important at all. So we want to make sure it's clear before. This also makes it clear why it's important for us to be doing this very stressful thing that none of us wants to do right now. By posting it widely, it helps stakeholders understand what our process is when that kind of incident happens. So if we say, in a severity 2, so we'll say, okay, we have this issue, it's a Sev 2. This is how this works. So now you know, right? This is where we'll be posting updates. This is how often we post updates, maybe. This is how quickly we respond to things, all this stuff. So it's all understood in advance, right? Or at least they can go find it without having to ask the people who are trying to solve the problem. So monitor your business criteria and act accordingly. So we have monitoring like things like Nagios. Those stuff are, that's going to be focused on CPU, memory, disk. But think about something that looks a little bit higher, right? Maybe something like Datadog or some kind of an APM solution, Dynatrace, whatever, Prometheus. I'm usually, Jason Yee's usually in the audience, so I have to throw the Datadog thing, but we'll throw the Prometheus thing. But here's the thing, right? We actually care about the application, because the application is the thing that serves our business. So with solutions like that help us see, hey, your business is about to have a problem, or your users are experiencing degradation in service. So ideally, this business or service level monitoring should work automatically to engage and start the process of an incident. Because, again, kind of thinking back to the olden days, it's olden days for me because I don't work for a living anymore. Like Bridget said, I don't sit on call. Although, funny thing is, starting to work at PagerDuty, I do. We'll talk about that in a minute. I don't actually have to solve any real problems, though, so it's good. But it used to be with something like, okay, great, so I'm carrying the pager or the BlackBerry or whatever, goes off. Oh, okay, got this thing, came in from SolarWinds. Now I'm going to go into our ticket system and I'm going to create an incident. Okay, what's the problem with that? Fallible, stupid human meatbag in the middle, right? Probably going to make mistakes. The other thing is watch your watchers, right? So at PagerDuty, we want to make sure that we're delivering notifications within a certain amount of time. If you're a PagerDuty customer, that probably matters to you. It's not helpful if something goes wrong with your system and it takes us 20 minutes to tell you about it. So that matters to us. So we have tools that sit there and say, how long is it taking to deliver notifications now? What about 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 now? Well, we also have a monitor that's watching that. And if our monitoring of the notifications goes down, that causes an incident for us because we're flying blind. It doesn't mean that we're not delivering notifications in a timely way, but it means we sure as hell don't know if we are or we aren't. So we want to know, and it means that's something that's just as important as actually delivering the notifications. Meta monitoring. It's turtles all the way down. And then at the bottom is a copy of What's Up Gold. So speaking of these humans, in addition to being fallible, they're also really, really expensive, right? So in a large organization, a bridge with 100 people sitting there mostly idle for several hours is not unheard of. How many people have sat on those calls? Okay, I used to work for a large bank whose name rhymes with face. Okay, and that's what incident calls were like. There'd be 100 people, right? That is so expensive to the organization. So it's a good thing that Chase is charging you all those ATM fees because they got to pay for all those people, right? So if each of those people cost $100 an hour, that's $10,000 an hour to sit there and do almost nothing. And then even forget about the dollar impact. There's a cost of productivity. If you've got 100 plus people spending these hours doing nothing at 2 in the morning, how productive are they going to be the next day? They're not getting a lot of high value work done. So when you're deciding who is and who isn't part of your incident response process, in terms of humans, realize it's something that's expensive to your business and design it accordingly. So we want to use humans when it requires a human brain to make a decision. This is true of all automation, right? You can automate any process up to the point that it requires human intervention. And usually the list of things that cannot be automated is a lot shorter than you think it is. This is when I'm putting my old chef hat back on. I'm thinking about that stuff. So, still happens, right? Okay, practice still makes perfect. We learned this in kindergarten. It's still true. So as you're moving along and creating these processes, these better ways of doing work, I hope, you want to practice all the steps that we're going to talk about that are in the during section. You want to practice this when it's not stressful. You want to practice this when you have control over the situation. So if you do any kind of failure injection or chaos engineering, if you want to be fancier with the terms, a failure Friday, we do failure Fridays at PagerDuty, but now they can be failure any days. We decided to not just do them on Fridays because it interfered with our hack days. So now we have them on just random days. But those are great times to practice your incident response process. Well, first of all, you should be treating your failure Fridays or failure Tuesdays just like a regular incident anyway. And the thing is, it's a really great time to practice because you actually know what's wrong, right? You know that we shot 2 of the load balancers out of the pool, right? So we know what the problem is, so we can make sure we're good at doing the process. And it's good because we're not under a lot of stress, and it's helping us build some organizational muscle memory, so when we have to deal with this during a stressful time, we're not having to remember how to do it at that point, right? It lets us focus more on the process, find out what works well and what doesn't. Also know your role, right? So before something happens, know who does what. A lot of times this feels like it happens ad hoc. But if you have to decide it during the incident, if you have to decide who's doing what during that time, guess what? That's yet another thing that's taking time and energy away from actually solving the problem. So again, things that we can do in advance. You're seeing a pattern here? Anything we can do beforehand takes stress and energy away from the during. So this is a very basic role structure. If you were to look at our response docs, you'll see ours has actually even evolved a little bit since this. This is loosely based on some first responder practices. So you have at the quote-unquote top, if you will, is the incident commander. I've heard in Sports Engine they call it an incident quarterback because cute. This is, again, kind of a paramilitary term, but this is one I have a hard time changing because it's important the incident commander is the person who is not sitting there and solving the problem. They are running all the plays. They are making sure that they're turning the gears and turning the wheel that gets us from things are broken to things are no longer broken, right? You can think about a task dispatcher. As information is observed and shared, the IC can direct others towards the next steps with that information. Sometimes the deputy and scribe are the same person, sometimes they're separate. We have a deputy because redundancy is important because, hey, incident commander might have to take a bio break. Also, while the incident commander is doing a lot of things like figuring out the next step, kind of dealing with this communication, the deputy can be helping by setting timers, can be doing some of the follow-up stuff, can also be serving as a scribe. We tend to, at PagerDuty, keep these roles separate now because scribe is so important that if you're doing anything but scribing, you're probably missing something, okay? But again, what works for you is what matters. Now, subject matter experts. Translation, people doing the work, okay? So these are the people, the incident commander, I don't care if the incident commander is the person who knows how to do this the best. They are not troubleshooting the problem. And I'm going to talk about how you solve for that in just a second. But for right now, let's not put names in the boxes, just say their role is never to do any troubleshooting. Their role is to help facilitate communication. And we're going to talk a little more about that. Subject matter experts are the people who have the most information and the ability to actually make an effect on the problem. So depending upon your organizational structure, right, you could have subject matter experts that are like the database team, the application team, the storage team or whatever, or it may be based upon, it's the load balancer, the order entry system, the whatever. Again, it's sort of saying this is what's representative of this particular subject matter expert that can actually handle that, right? So maybe aligned by teams, such as like the DBA that's on call, or it could also be dependent on services. Remember, this is the person who is most responsible for a given area who also has the ability to most directly affect it. Your fancy pants white tower architect who doesn't have permissions in production is probably not very helpful as a SME here, right? Unless they can actually tell you what to do. This person can not only observe what is wrong, but can do something about it. Have a clear understanding of which human is supposed to be involved in which role. I hear there's a company that makes a product that could help you with this. So this shows who is involved and maybe even more importantly, who is not, right? This can actually help absolve stress. So if I know that this week I'm not going to be called, this lets me actually enjoy my time, right? So I am much better equipped during the time that I am on call. How many people have been the person who was on call all the time because you were the only person who knew about a thing in your organization? That sucks. That is dangerous to the organization because you can never, ever, ever relax. So, let's talk about what happens during a call. So one of the first things that happens is the incident commander introduces themselves. Hi, this is Matt. I'm the incident commander. Who is on the call? Stating this makes it clear. Don't abbreviate it to IC. Don't say, hey, it's Matt, I'm the IC. People who are new might not know what an IC is. And the word commander subconsciously instills in people that you're in charge. I know that sounds like kind of a jerk move. It's kind of important. In this particular case, incident commanders can be subconsciously jerks. Maybe. I don't know. I didn't like that. This is one that people have trouble with understanding. But the incident commander is, no matter what their day-to-day role, I don't care what your normal job is, I don't care what your pay grade is, I don't care where you fall in the org chart, you are the highest ranking person on the call. Outside of the call, no. But on the call, yes. If the CEO joins, the incident commander outranks them in an incident response situation. This is really critical for successful incident response. This requires buy-in from your executives. Do not surprise them with this. It will not go well for you. We have the CEO of PagerDuty is a woman named Jen Tejada, who's one of the most amazing people I've had the privilege to work for so far in my life, my career. And heard this story. So Jen's been at PD for about 18 months. And shortly after she started, there's a major incident. These things happen, right? And, wheels are turning, incident call's going. Jen gets on and says, I want this fixed in 10 minutes. The incident commander says, Jen, I need you to leave the call, please. And she kind of hemmed and hawed and left. And they talked in the kind of the retrospective, and they're like, that was actually very stressful for that to happen, for the CEO to get on and bark orders. And it was just what she was used to. And, kind of through education, it's like, this is why it's actually not helpful to do that. When we talk about this, I'm not going to go into this in great depth here, but when we do training around incident command for customers, and we talk about a lot of techniques to deal with this, because it's really hard. This is one slide that just says, hey, guess what? IC is the most important person on the call. Great. But we talk in training about how to deal with things like the executive swoop, which is when, an executive gets on and starts barking orders. And by the way, spoiler alert for that one, you just say, hey, Joe, are you going to take over as incident commander then? And that makes that conversation stop very quickly, right? So now the IC manages the flow of conversation. And this goes in both directions, right? It's bidirectional, full duplex, if you will. Ethernet joke. So your stakeholders or your SMEs are going to say things like, hey, I just heard from a customer we're having an issue. What's going on? The IC can say things, okay, I have a report that says this is going on. I'm going to get a resource from the app team to see if we've done any pushes lately. Goes through, engages the resources. And then the IC might tell them, hey, here's the problem. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Come back to me with what's going on. I'll check in with you in 5 minutes if I haven't heard from you. The IC is not the one solving the problem, but is setting up the context for everybody else to work together without everybody else having to worry about what everybody else is doing, right? So you're not sitting there going, okay, I'm on the data team and going, God, oh, you know what? I wonder if there's something wrong with the load balancer. Is someone going to ask the load balancer people to check a thing? You don't have to worry about it. You worry about your own thing. Now, I said before, the incident commander does not help with the troubleshooting. What happens if I'm on call as incident commander and I happen to be the smartest person on the call about this one thing? Not the smartest person in general, but I'm the expert. I have somebody else take over as incident commander. You know, we trade it out, and we have another incident commander take over for me so that I can become a subject matter expert. What matters, it's you're not dogmatic about like, well, I'm on call for IC this week, so I guess I can't fix anything. Just means you can't wear both hats at the same time. So at the beginning, I asked if someone could keep track of time. Did anybody do that? Okay, well, Joe did. But generally speaking, probably not. And this is the bystander effect. Because I sat there and I just said, can someone, right? Now, even though Joe actually did it, the problem was this is I didn't know that he did. I didn't know that Joe actually did what I wanted him to do, that he understood what I was asking for. I said, can you keep track of time? That could mean lots of things to different people. Thing is, when you use the phrase, can someone, generally no one will actually do because they're going to assume someone else did. Let me put it this way. How many people are in this room? Joe's the only one that was keeping track of time. The rest of you figured someone else was going to do it, right? Yep, okay. Two of you did it. So a better approach would be, Ben, please keep track of time and give me a little wave when we get close to 30 minutes, starting now. Understood?
Copy.
Yep. So let's think about that in an incident situation. So you could sit here and say, by the way, Eric Sigler, previously of PagerDuty, just left to go work for a living. He used to give this presentation. That's why Eric's picture is in there and not mine, because I don't know how to use Keynote. So I'm in the process of moving this all to Reveal. So he says, Rich, I'd like you to investigate the increased latency, try to find the cause, come back to you in 5 minutes. Understood. Rich says, understood. So this is a lot more verbose than, hey, can someone do this thing? But there's some very specific important things in here. The task was assigned to a specific individual, right? It's okay to assign it to a role. Yeah, I need the DBA on call to do this. But it has to be an individual, right? You don't say, hey, team, do this. Hey, it can be a role, but it's usually better to use human names. You probably know everybody on the call because you're not going to have 100 people on your call. The task was given a time limit. So this SME knew exactly how long until the IC is going to come back for an answer. So the SME is not going to be surprised or caught off guard when he comes back in 5 minutes and says, yo, what up? He's not going to be like, whoa, why are you asking already? And then the IC confirmed that the SME had understood the instructions and are going to carry them out. So that way it doesn't come back in 5 minutes and say, oh, wait a minute. Oh, I thought you meant I should do this instead, right? And I know this sort of sounds like I'm making the SME sound stupid, and they're not. These are normal things to happen if it's not clear. Because again, we're in a stressful situation and words are hard. So speaking of words being hard, humor can be really helpful. We're in a very stressful situation here. You have to diffuse things. Sometimes when we're on an incident, the team could start chasing their tail, start going down a rat hole, or individuals might not be very helpful to one another, So as an IC, you can use humor to move that person who's doing something maybe not so productive out of the flow of conversation so that it's not stopping what's going on. So this is an example clip from JFK Air Traffic Control. If you think about it, air traffic control is constantly dispatching people from point A to point B so that they don't, the giant metal tubes don't collide with one another. This is where we see if the... Oh, this worked before. This is HDMI, so I thought that was what. This media volume is all the way up. It's okay. We can kind of go ahead. So, because I don't want to lose it. But okay. So pilot says Roger that. Ground traffic says Delta Tug 5, go right on Bravo. It says right on Bravo, taxi. Then it says testing, 1, 2, 3. Air traffic control says, well, you can count to 3. It's a step in the right direction. Please find another frequency to test on now, which was what the question was. So this is a little bit, and he says, sorry, right? So it's a little funny. It's funnier if you could hear it. I don't do it well, but because you can hear what they're doing wrong. But the thing is, the IC made a joke, but also told the SME what they needed to do. So incident calls don't have to be super cut and dry, but make sure that any humor you do is in the context of moving the conversation forward. Make sure you know who's engaged. Have a roster who the specific people are in each role. This is the DBA who has the thing going on. This DBA does not have a thing going on. This is the thing. You want to get all the right people on the call as soon as you need to, but you want to get them off the call as soon as possible. It is really stressful to be sitting on a call with nothing to do, waiting for someone else to do work. So that's stressful for you, being the network person that's sitting there going, oh, I got to sit here while the application team goes and does another build, and I got nothing to do. It's even more stressful for the people doing the work, knowing that there's a whole bunch of people sitting there pissed off at them because they don't have anything to do right then. So when someone, as the IC, start kicking people off the call when they aren't needed. Do it as fast as you can. You can recruit them back in when you need them, if you need them later. Have an agreed upon mechanism for the SMEs to contribute information to the call. This is, again, something you decide in advance, but any way for the SME to say, hey, I have some new information for you. So that can be something where they just have some acknowledged way to raise a hand. You may be doing it in a Slack channel. I've had the question asked after this talk about, hey, do you do audio bridges, do you do phone bridges, or do you do Slack? And I was like, we actually do both. But Slack is not the primary mechanism of communication during the call. It's really just a place of keeping, actually what's happening is a scribe is usually updating that with the call. The reason is for anybody who's ever used the internet, people don't always understand typed words. So it's helpful to be able to have the audio and the cues of that during that time. Have a clear mechanism for making decisions. So if it's so easy that anyone can do it, then robots should be doing it, right? Talked about this before. Unless it requires a human decision, then it should be automated. So the call should be for things that require human decisions. Now we're going to make decisions, so we have to have a clear mechanism for doing that. This is the mechanism for making the decisions, and it's stated definitively, right? So you'd say, Incident Commander, I think we should do X. Incident Commander says the proposed action is X. Is there any strong objection? There's another version of this slide where it comes up and it says the slide is blue, and I say, first would say, hey, does anybody think that this, what color is this slide? Can we agree upon what color this slide is? And we do that and say, how many people object to the fact that this slide is blue, right? Then we know that. When I was in Boy Scouts in high school, and we went backpacking in New Mexico, I learned that when you're starting out on the trail, after a break, you don't say, who's ready? Or is everybody ready? You say, is anybody not ready? Right? Because that's the smaller thing. So the reason for this is it's clear about the proposal, and we're asking for objections. This is one that I'm still I'm still working with to figure out how we can do that, because asking for a strong objection, sometimes people may feel steamrolled. Sometimes, while that's not the best thing for humans, in the moment it might be okay. You have to make sure that you have a channel for that if you do have an objection and you don't feel comfortable or you don't feel confident in raising that objection, that there's another channel to be able to raise it. Capture everything, right? Write it all down. Document as much as possible. Hey, we have a scribe. So if you're able to, call out what's important to do now rather than later, or what you might be important to do later, right? So an example might be during the call while you're solving this, you're like, damn temp folder filled up with log files again. This happens all the time. We really ought to write a script to clear these things out. Well, you're not going to write the script during the call, right? Hopefully not. But you should also write down, we need to do this. This will help you in your postmortem, in your review later, so you don't have to remember that. Call out ideas for proactive items that came up. And then finally, we need to have a review. We're going to have a review of this incident. And there has to be an owner assigned to the review before the call is officially over. Even though everyone wants nothing more than to get off the phone, you have to get this assigned to a specific human before ending the call. The IC does not always have to be the owner of this, but has to make sure that it gets assigned. Again, just because you own this doesn't mean you have to do it. But this way we know who's going to follow up on it. Bystander effect, right? So now let's talk about after, the things that you actually just said you're going to own. So has everyone here heard of Blameless Postmortems? Okay. If not, Google them. Or there's resources at the end of this deck. We're not going to go into it too much right now. But the idea behind this is we're doing something afterwards. You might call it an after-action report. That's very kind of military. We might call it postmortems. Some people don't like postmortems because it's not like our systems died, right? Or we might call them learning reviews if we're feeling especially hug-opsy, right? So depends on whatever you want to call it. The idea is it's something you're going to look at after the fact, right? What we're going to do there is we're going to capture all of the information about what went right and what went wrong and review it afterwards. This is incredibly valuable. And you do it for every incident, not just for your major incidents. This happens at PagerDuty. I see this happen in chats, which is like, oh, well, do we have to do a postmortem? Was this a big deal? Like, yes, you do. Maybe you don't have to have a meeting, but you got to do it. Think about it this way. The NTSB has reports on all crashes, even if they aren't fatal, right? Because it still matters. And don't forget to think in your review about what happened to the humans because of what happened. It's not just about the systems. It's not just about the servers and networks and microservices and databases. It's about these humans that work for you and with you. Hey, someone got called at 6 p.m. at their kid's birthday party because she was the only one who knew the information we needed. Identifying that in the postmortem means that you can in the future, A, help alleviate stress on that individual, but it also makes your organization more resilient, right? That's a huge, sometimes they call it the bus factor, which is just as bad as saying postmortem, because then this is terrible. We should, people don't die, but anyway. Record your incident calls. This is so painful, but it's also super valuable. So record your calls if you can. Play them back at 1.5 or 2 times speed, like listening to a podcast, right? When you're going back through, you're kind of spinning through, looking for the highest speed. You do it on YouTube, whatever, right? So this helps you find the things you didn't catch at the time. Because again, you're furiously recording and thinking, but there's a lot going on. So when you go back through that, you might be like, oh, I didn't even notice that this thing happened. Or things you didn't address in the review. There's a thing called the recency effect. Most postmortems talk about the thing that happened in the last 10% of the incident, because that's what you remember because it just happened. You forget about all the stuff that happened in the beginning, especially when it's a long call that maybe spanned days, right? You're going to remember most of the stuff that happened probably at the very beginning, at the very end. A call recording will help you catch all those things. Also, continuous improvement. That's a big DevOps thing, right? So quarterly, annually, whatever interval, review your process. Make sure that you're asking the right questions in your process. We're going through this at PagerDuty right now. This is a project that I'm a part of, which is pretty cool. So we're sitting there and saying, okay, so we feel like we're pretty good at incident review enough that we kind of had the guts to go out there and be like, hey, let's open source it and be experts, right? But we know that we're still not perfect. There's things we can do better around commercial response and other stuff. And so we're continually, it's been reviewed, it's been identified, and now we're spending time to make it better. And having that stuff be in the open is actually pretty cool because then other people can help you with it. An example, because things will continually change. There's a certain point at PagerDuty that everybody in the company was paged on a critical incident. That works at a certain size. There's 40 people in the company, you can do that. You can't do it when there's 400, right? Our CEO gets paged on every, certain customers have any issues, she gets paged, which is interesting. Also, she hates acronyms, so if you use three-letter acronyms in a row, in Slack, she gets paged somehow. So I heard about that one the other day. I was like, how does that work? So yeah. So this is the tricksy part here because this is the last audio that. No, but there's no audio on the, if I'm on HDMI. Yeah, it is. It's all the way up there. Oh, it was on mute. Okay. Okay, so that's good. Well, this is the good part. Okay, so who's seen Apollo 13? Okay. If you haven't, it's a good movie. So if we think about what happened in Apollo 13, it's basically this. So you got a large number of technically adept people who are very good at running their infrastructure. They have some monitoring. They have an end user. Suddenly their monitoring is telling them that something slightly different is happening. And then their end user calls to tell them that the thing isn't doing what it normally does. Does this sound familiar to anybody? It's supposed to sound like your life. So the movie is more dramatic than real life, than how things really happen, because, movie. But this is the first 2 minutes from the point of explosion from the actual flight director's loop of Apollo 13. So I want you to think about this from an incident command and incident response call perspective. So listen for when the SMEs start to offer information. Listen for pushback when the IC says, I think you've given me information that is not correct. And then listen for when the IC starts that problem-solving loop. Okay, cool, SMEs, you've given me information. You've given me information. Now let's put this together.
Okay, you got to pass the data for the crew checklist anyway on board, don't you? Right. Don't you got a page update? Well, why don't we read it up to them, and that'll serve both purposes. All right. Both have them entered, as well as why don't you tell them what page you want it in the checklist. Okay. Flight tell you. Go tell them. We show the LEM overhead hatch is closed and the heater current looks normal. Okay. 5 guidance. Go guidance. We've had a hardware restart. I don't know what it was. Okay. GNC, you want to look at it? See if you see any problems? Roger, we're copying it, Capcom. We see a hardware restart. You see an AC bus undervolt there, guidance? Or ECOM? Negative, flight. I believe the crew reported it. We got a main B undervolt. Okay, flight, we've got some instrumentation flights. Let me add them up. Roger. Okay, stand by, 13. We're looking at it. We may have had an instrumentation problem, flight. Roger. Flight Inco. Go Inco. We switched to wide beam with about the time you had that problem. The voltage is looking good. And we had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning there. And as I recall, main B was the one that had a amp spike on it once before. Okay. Roger, Fred. Inco, you say you want the wide beam with there? Yes. Let's see if we can correlate those times. Get the time when you want the wide beam there, Inco. And the interim here,
So we can borrow a lot of things from a lot of different industries. We talked about first responders, talked about air traffic control, also, the spaceflight program in the last century. So this, as we just listened to, that was a lot less dramatic than the Ron Howard version, but it's an example of what a really good incident call can sound like. And actually, the entire flight director loop is available on YouTube, and I have the links in here, I think. Some interesting listening. So a couple to review. Have that structure in place beforehand. We're not litigating things during a call. Practice. Have clearly delineated roles. You're going to manage the flow of conversation. Make clear decisions. One of the things that we say in our incident response training that some people disagree with is making any decision is better than making no decision. Your mileage may vary, but rally fast, disband faster. Your colleagues will thank you. And review your process regularly. Some additional reading for you. So the folks at BlackRock wrote this book, Incident Management for Operations. A lot of this is similar to some of the stuff we talked about there. These folks were actually, a week or so ago, were on a podcast called The Food Fight Show. If you go to foodfightshow.org, I think it's the chef podcast, talking about incident management. So this O'Reilly book goes into a lot more detail. And just bear in mind, right, don't panic, stay calm, calm people stay alive. when PagerDuty was putting together the incident response process, some of the folks trained with some firefighters, and not like in actually putting out fires and hoses and stuff, but just talking through incident process. And one of the firefighters was telling my now former colleague Eric, who's gone off to better things, said, you know what, this is not an uncommon scenario where they'll be out, on a call, putting out their fire, and the homeowner is freaking out and hysterical, as you might be if your house is on fire. And oh my God, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? And he said, you know what you say to him? You say, hey, this may be your first fire, but it's not ours, right? The same thing. You know who's freaking out on these calls? Product owner, business owner, executives. This may be their first Sev 1. It's not yours. It's not your first one. So I don't know if we have time for a couple questions, and if not, we'll be around during the break. And
A couple questions. But first, thank you.
oh, thanks. I will get these slides posted on there just so that you don't have to, don't worry about scrambling this down. But there is a YouTube, the Angry Air Traffic Controllers and Pilots is where the clip is that you couldn't hear. But it's a whole bunch of just kind of amusing things to listen to. Blameless Postmortems, this is Etsy's engineering blog when John Allspaw first wrote about Blameless Postmortems, back when amazing things were being done somewhere. Hey, there was this podcast called Arrested DevOps, and they did an episode called Incidents and Accidents, which is, Bridget loves this joke, by the way. I
like
totally
that
forgot.
song.
I totally forgot that we called it that. But anyway, we had, who do we have? We had Michael Rembetzi and, I don't know. It was great. We talked about this. And if you go to response.pagerduty.com, you can see our process. So, thanks.
All right, awesome. We have time for a couple of questions, if we have a few people with questions. If we don't have people raise their hands, I'm just going to take the mic and put it in front of people and require them to ask a question.
Or you can talk to me during the break if you don't feel like asking a question in front of everybody.
Ooh, I do see one.
Oh.
But first I'm going to hand it to Andy,
Yeah.
since I'm standing here. Oh, no, Andy, I'm handing it to you to make you ask a question.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I get it.
I knew she was coming this direction. This is like my favorite topic, like for the record. Questions.
What do you want him to say a little bit more about?
In your experience at PagerDuty, like how big, I'm going to give you a softball. How big is the blameless aspect of postmortems? Like what impact does that make versus like, and how do you actually make a postmortem blameless? This is not a small question.
It's not. And I'm going to redirect for more, well, just because I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and if you want to listen to 30 minutes. We did an Ask Me Anything with J. Paul Reed on the PagerDuty community site a couple weeks ago that was all about blameless postmortems, and a lot of these questions are answered. But in our experience, what I've seen so far is it works pretty well because it's so important to our culture. And I know talking about culture is like this big smushy, yogurt talk, but this is going to sound backwards, you will actually get in trouble if you blame people in the company. Right? Because that's against how we work, right? So now it's not like you'll get in trouble like you're going to get put on a plan or get your hand slapped or anything, but you will be, it's a learning opportunity. The management is built to say this is a learning opportunity, and it happens. It happens with people who are good at this, right? Because we're humans, right? So we're going to go down this path. We don't do this perfect every time. The thing is to be able to make this work is to be able to, first of all, identify when it happens. Right? And say, hey, you know what? And be able to talk about it offline, not in the moment, because you don't want to make somebody feel bad, but be able to take somebody aside and say, hey, you know what? When that thing happened there, that made me feel, or maybe you're empowered to be able to do that, or you might be able to speak on behalf of somebody, not on behalf of somebody else, but you observe it and say, hey, that point that was a little bit kind of different than how we do it, so let's figure out how that can happen. And again, to give a story, it's an Etsy story, so John Allspaw, if you don't know who he is, and that's okay, but he's the guy who invented a lot of this DevOps crap. And at the time, he was the CTO or whatever of Etsy. The point is, he's C-suite, important executive. And during a meeting, he said something that made one of their engineers feel badly. And afterwards, this engineer came up to him individually and just said, hey, man, I don't think you meant this, but that was a really shitty thing to say. And John was like, you know what? You're right. And then he apologized, like took care of it in front of the whole team later. So the thing is, you have to be able to address these things as learning moments. Not like you're a bad person and you should feel bad because, you pointed a finger at somebody in the moment, but look at it as a learning opportunity and say, here's how you could have done this better. Because it's also much easier for us to observe, right? To sit there and be the bystander and say like, oh, you know what? When Marcus did that there during the postmortem, he didn't even realize that he was pointing a finger there. But I could sit here and watch it. But to be able to have a safe place to be able to say, let's talk about that. And a lot of times you need to have that conversation separately, where that can happen. So that's some of the things to think about. But the other thing is people won't believe it till it happens. People who have not been in a blameless culture will not believe it till they break something and don't get fired. You gotta, I always say, I'm from Missouri, show me, right? I won't believe it till I see it.
I remember the first time where I was like, I'm pretty sure I don't have a job anymore. Oh, wow, really? We're going to just talk about this? It's like, yep.
I was all set to hide it.
All right, we have another question over here.
Hi, I'm Megan. I work here at SBS. We are working on a project about incident management and coming up with a new playbook. So I would like to know, you talked a lot about just being on a call for Sub 1. What is your prescription for when you are on a call versus when you're in a chat room, on Slack or HipChat, whatever you use? And if you are mainly in chat rooms because, say, a Sub 1 is very important, but it might be resolved quickly, like when do you not have a call and how can you let people go easily in a chat room or not?
For us, a high severity incident, pretty much every incident creates a bridge. And not for nothing, I know I'm not selling products here, but it's because PagerDuty makes that really easy, right? When and other tools do that too. So I'm not trying to say, but that's why you need to have something like PagerDuty, some tool that does that automatically. Because if what you have to do to set up a bridge, if setting up a bridge is arduous, then you're not going to do it, right? It needs to be easy so that it just is no big deal. That you have to have that, because a problem with communicating any type of resolution that's not just like, because all incidents are incidents. It's some type of interruption in service. It all deserves, even if it's only going to take you 5 minutes to solve it, get on the phone, right? If that's the thing is, because otherwise what you're doing now you're litigating. Do we start a call? Do we not start a call? Do we create this thing to do that? It's a lot easier to not have to think about it. And again, my experience is still old-fashioned mouth words, so much better than the chat. I mean, chat's good for doing great things like being able to paste in code to run and stuff like that. So it's a really awesome sidecar to it.
I
Say,
like, we have a thing where you just type /Zoom, enter, you have a call.
Yeah.
Done. Get on the call.
All right, well, we'll give you the mic, and we'll take one more question, and then we're going to take a short break.
Isn't there a point, though, where it doesn't make sense to have an incident commander and a deputy scribe on every bridge? I mean, so you just got to let people solve problems without incidents without getting a bridge? Or maybe they do a bridge themselves?
Well, again, then it's not an incident. Then it's actually maybe a low enough kind of thing. And you could always sit to say that, right? The problem that you run into when you deviate from process anywhere is that that's an exception, right? And now you have to say, now you could say that for Sev 4s, whatever those might be, then we don't create calls, we don't have an incident commander, you just do your thing. I think what you're going to tend to find is that those are going to be very arduous then, because having this process in place makes things go so much faster. I mean, I'm telling you, I've sat, because I'm going to tell you a very quick story about non-engineering incident command.
Very quick.
Yes, so just an example. So there's a woman who's a product owner at PagerDuty named Rachel Byrne. She's given a talk about this a couple times at various DevOps days. And Rachel, almost said is notorious, but not notorious, is known as being the first non-engineering incident commander at PagerDuty. And now lots of people do it. Because in fact, it's actually even more helpful when you're not the engineer on the system that's doing that. So this is the on-call. Like I said, I've been on call but not done any work, right? I'm only on call as an incident commander. And there have been plenty of times I've gotten called in, gotten on the bridge, done the thing, and it's done in 10 minutes. And it doesn't piss me off, because it probably would have taken longer if we didn't do that. But again, I go back to if it takes you 10 minutes to get the thing spun up, that's a problem. The reason we can do that is that starting an incident call takes a couple minutes and everything's ready because it's already automatically set up. When an incident gets raised, nobody even does /Zoom. It's just part of the system. Part of the system is it creates the bridge and it's there. And then I get the page or I get the notification in my app and it's like I click on it and I'm on the call, right? And I'm not saying you have to do that, but you have to have something that's easy. So that's why I see where you're coming from. You're like, oh, there's all this overhead to do it when it's only a 10-minute thing. The right thing is get rid of the overhead, because you can have the value out of doing the thing.
Right, we are so close to out of time, but I have one other person who really wants to ask one more question. So I'm going to allow one more question, and then we are taking a break.
Sorry for that last minute question. So it's kind of an SME situation question. So there is always like one which is more of like, when an incident happens, you have to troubleshoot and then investigate why the issue happened. And then the other one, which is more instant responsive, like restart the service, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is it purely defined by the product team or business SLA setup, or do you have any kind of...
It really depends. It's going to depend on your organization about how you structure it. Some organizations, it makes sense to structure it by system, to say like the DBA on call, the server, because again, it depends on how I'd say if you're siloed or not. But when you look at systems like more cross-functional teams, then you're going to have whoever is the on-call. And the thing is, you can always escalate. There's always escalations, right? Which can say like, okay, I know this much, but there might be someone else to be able to go towards. But people being able, the more flexibility you have about being able to get a hold of people while they're on call and at no other time, the less upset people are about being gotten a hold of, right? Because you're like, okay, I know that I'm on call. That's fine. I'm only on call now. And I know I also won't mind you calling me if we have this rally fast, disband faster culture, right? Which I know that, that getting paged doesn't mean I'm about to go sit on a bridge for 3 hours. It means I'm going to get on, do what I can, and you're going to kick me off until you need me again. So that's where you can help with the stuff like you're like, sometimes all you need is someone just to restart a system. Cool, call me, because I trust that I'll be in and out, so.
Yeah, and there's so much to talk about there, but I'm going to refrain from jumping in and wanting to talk about this because we are going to, first we're going to say thank you so much again to Stratton